It's still out there. It's very much still out there. Hello fellow 3D enthusiast, my name is Ian, and today I wanted to share with you how I created this visual effects shot. If you missed it, there is a giant Sirenhead figure in the background here behind these trees, so I'm just going to run over how to do a tripod track, how to set up a scene for a basic visual effects shot, and then how to composite this guy into the background here. So yeah, that's the intro. Let's do it. Alright, so let's just hop in here. If we add a new tab and go VFX and go motion tracking, we can start cleaning up this window here a little bit. There are a few of these we don't really need. So if we just grab the corner of these windows and start collapsing them, get those out of here. There we go. And if we just grab this and move it up, we have a timeline down there. That's very nice. I'm going to open my footage here that I'm going to be putting stuff in. And I found my image sequence here. You can use video if you want. Image sequences load a little bit better, I think. But anyways, just going to drop that in. Let's take a look and scrub through here. I think it ends before the full frame length. So I'm just going to set that to be my end frame. So playback and set end frame. There we go. Very nice. Alright, so let's talk about this footage for a second here. I was happily recording out in a treehouse to get some nice footage for this project, and then it started pouring on me. And as you can see here, this is extremely heavy rain, and it almost looks like there's fog in the woods, which, first of all, is good for setting an extremely creepy vibe, and second of all, can be used as a luma key. And if you don't know what that is, it is when the background of a shot is really white, and then the foreground is really dark, like this. And the really cool thing about that is we can tell Blender, hey, I'd like this white part to be behind my character, and this dark part to be in front of my character. And sometimes that can work if you have a really bright sky and a tree line or something, and you want something to be way above the tree line. You can just use the sky and say, hey, this is the background, and I want to drop my digital thingy in front of that. So like I mentioned, I got super lucky with this rainstorm, so we can put something in the forest right around here, and have this white part be the background, and these darker parts up here be the foreground. But the first step before we even think about that is to track this footage. And as we pan through here, you can see there's a little bit of movement around here, but generally it's just rotation instead of location. So I'm going to call this a tripod shot, even though I was holding it in my hands, and that can actually be a lot more forgiving to track. So if you've never done tracking before, welcome. It can be kind of a pain sometimes, but I think we're going to have fun with this shot here. The idea is you find some pretty high contrast spots and then go Control and left mouse button, and that will add this little bracket here, and this is your tracker. And if you go down to the settings down here, you can put forward or track it backward. I'm somewhere near the end of my footage, so I'll track it forward for now. And you can see this little red line here. That means it tracked these frames here that are kind of yellowish. And then we can track it backwards, and it lost the track. But if we take a look here, L to lock our view to this tracker, and then play the animation forwards, you can see it is tracking this log, and the rest of the footage is just kind of moving around loosely. And this is kind of something like what we want. So I'm just going to go to this frame and help it out a little bit by going to the previous frame where it lost it and just replace it there, and then track backwards once more. And you can see it's tracked all the way to the start of the scene. It will not always go this easy for you. Sometimes when you have lots of motion blur, that can be really hard for the computer to track, but also it is surprisingly robust, so it knows how to do things pretty well. So when you're doing a tripod track, if I'm not mistaken, you only need 4 trackers, but the more you add, the better an idea it'll have of how your camera is moving. So let's just drop in a few more here, and I'll speed it up for you because that is kind of boring. Sometimes, if you're going to track something into a scene, it's a good idea to have some trackers around where you're going to be tracking the object in. And I think our monster is going to be somewhere out here in the fog. So I'm going to start seeing if I can track some of these blurry trees back here. I know that can tend to be a little bit tricky, but once again, Blender's tracker is pretty good if you don't have too much motion blur. Like, for example, it just tracked the base of that tree really nicely, even though that's super foggy. Nice. And this spot is super high contrast, so we could probably track that pretty well. Now right here, we ran into an issue that you might find fairly often, which is this crazy jittering back and forth between two frames. And that's just Blender being super confused about what's going on. And for these frames, it's generally a good idea to just reorient it, put it back where it belongs. And right about here, it made a jump to this side. It decided it wanted to track over here, which is not what we want. That would give us pretty horrible results. So I'm just going to replace that and then try once again to track it backwards. And once again, it's jumping all over the place. So if you ever decide that it's a lost cause, if you go right to the point where it starts messing up, right now all of this side of the footage is tracked pretty nicely, but the start of the footage is not very nice. So we can go over to the track settings here again and see this where it says clear. If we go like that and clear what it tracked before, that will erase all that nasty jittering. And we only have what's going on after that. It's alright if your tracks don't go completely throughout the whole shot. It is helpful if they do, but you don't absolutely need them to. Now I have a few trackers in place here. I'm going to see if I can solve this and get a pretty nice error. We'll see. If we go to solve here in the tab and go tripod for now, because we're doing a tripod, I'm going to refine my focal length because I'm not sure what that is, and then just hit solve camera motion. And when we solve that, you can see the message here that says reprojection error 1.395. Generally, if you can get that under 1, that is ideal. So let's real quick set up our scene. I'm going to go over to layout and take my camera here. If we go numpad 1 to go into front view and control and alt and 0 on the numpad, that'll place our camera down. Let's kind of zoom this in on the cube for a second here. Move it up a little bit, GZ. And let's see what happens when we add the solver constraint. So if we go into constraints here and go add object constraint, camera solver, we can take a look here and just play through the animation and see what happens. Not a whole lot. That's messed up. Oh, geez. That's crazy. Wow. Now, I accidentally added this to my cube, which is very interesting. Might be able to use that later, but right now we don't want that there. Let's select our camera. I thought I did that, but camera solver. And go back to the start. Go into camera view with 0 on the number pad. And then just take a look here. That's pretty nice looking. Might need to line it up a little bit better eventually, but if we go into the camera settings here, and then go background images, check that, add image, movie clip, and then just look here for our clip, rainy sauce. And we can take a look in here and just see how well this is looking. We want our cube to be kind of sticking to the ground, and so far, it looks like it's doing a pretty good job of that, which is nice. I'm going to reorient my camera a little bit here by going R and Z, and then I'm just going to line up that cube with kind of the horizon line. Very nice, something around there. Alright, so we don't really need this cube. It's been useful, but we can delete that. So X and delete, and I'm going to go Shift A and add in a plane. And then this, I'm just going to scale up quite a bit. And if you've been following the past few tutorials, you have a nice working Sirenhead monster that you can drop in here. If we take a look over here, in this file, I'm just going to select the rig, go Shift and bracket, and that will just select the children of. And if we hit the bracket a few times, that will actually go all the way down the parent chain. So that's nice. And then we can go Control C. That will copy this model. And that's great. We have all this selected. If we hop back to our other scene here and go Control V, that will add in our model. And this guy is looking huge. Honestly, it'd be really creepy if it was just standing right here and all you could see were the terrible feet. Anyways, I'm going to scale this down a little bit and put him in the woods. So G, Z, that grabs it and moves it down, and then S will scale it. We probably want it somewhere around this height. Alright. And I'm just moving it around with G, and if I want it to move around on the plane, I can hit G and Shift Z, and that'll move it around on everything but the Z axis. Or if you want, you can just grab these arrows and use this little blue square here and move it around. Somewhere out there looks pretty nice. If we move our cursor to the plane here with Shift and right mouse button, that will set that there. And then we can just hit period on the keyboard and go 3D cursor. That'll set the pivot point to be there. And then if we scale it up, it'll scale up on the ground. So that looks pretty nice. And I kind of like something like that. I might want them a little bit farther back though. So go like that. There we go. Nice. I just want the sirens to be barely visible over these trees here. And I've actually fiddled around with this shot quite a bit to find the best place for this guy, but around there looks pretty good, I think. So if we hit the play button, you can see this guy is pretty nicely tracked in. It's not perfect, but if you spend a little bit more time on the track, which we can actually do, that might help. So once you've solved the track and you've got that reprojection error down there, if you want to hit cleanup and go to error, we could set this to something crazy like 5 and then clean tracks. That will select all the tracks that have a error above 5, and we're looking pretty good here. So let's go down to say 2. Clean tracks. This one was not very good, so I'm going to delete that. That'll end up making the whole track a lot cleaner. What if we say 1.5? That's these two. I think we can still track without those two there, so let's try this. Very nice. We're down to almost 1 here, so this will look a lot better in the final product. Now if we look up really close here, you can see he's doing a lot better at sticking to where he should. And this is just one of the most exciting things to me with visual effects, is putting not real objects in real videos and then just getting them to look like they belong there. I'm just going to scale this up again. I think our camera moved a little bit, but that should be pretty good there. Now if we go into rendered view, I think I'm using Eevee at the moment, so let's switch to cycles for this. We've got our nice materials going on and our nice sculpting. That's real cool. I'm going to grab this lamp and actually just delete it. And then I'm also going to duplicate this plane here, and let's actually hit period and set our pivot point back to median point. There we go, it's the middle of the plane. If we duplicate this with Shift D and Z and move that up there, that should be alright. Then we can just hop to the material tab, go new material, and emission. And this will be kind of like the light coming out of the sky that's very, very soft. And also if we just go to the object settings here and visibility, and then uncheck camera, that way the camera won't see it in the render. Now while we're in this tab, if we select the ground plane here and just check shadow catcher, that will mostly make it disappear. It still looks a little bit strange, and that's just because our background right now is gray. If we go up into the render properties up here and then go to film and check transparent, then that will disappear and we can see this checker pattern out here, and we can see that it is only shadows now. And that will be really helpful for making the feet look realistic because they'll actually have shadows. This is a little insert. One thing we're going to want to do in our render is in the render properties here. If we go down to color management, that might be collapsed, but you can just uncollapse it. Switch view transform to be standard from Filmic. That way our color management of our CG stuff is the same as our standard footage. Another thing we want to add, just so things blur together a little bit better, is motion blur. Okay, here's another little insert because I just kept forgetting things. We've got the color management and we've got the motion blur, but one more important thing to add is to sync up your frame rate with the original video footage that you took. And you can just find the setting for the frame rate down here where it says frame rate in the output properties. Boom. Now our next step here is to go into compositing and just put the footage and this render together. If we hop over to this tab here, and we really don't need most of this stuff, so I'm just going to go control space, so this is full screen, and I'm going to check use nodes. Render layers is going to be our digital object, and then if we go Shift A, input, and movie clip, we can grab, actually, by default it put in our movie clip, so that's nice. Another thing we could use is a viewer node, and if you have Node Wrangler enabled, you can just go Control and Shift and click on a node, and that will view it. So that's pretty cool. Alright, now if we view our render layers here, nothing appears. So let's just render our file real quick here. So F12 to do that. And there's this guy. For my render settings, actually, it's so far away, I'm just going to set the samples down a little bit. So if we go render properties, samples are a little bit high. I'm just going to go 50 for now, and then also check adaptive sampling. That will help with our noise. And then if we render that out, that'll be quite a bit faster, I think. Nice. 3 seconds, that's not bad. Alright, so to mix these two together, you just go color, mix, and then just drop that in there. Drop this underneath, and then check this little box here. If we take a look, it's terrible. Let's flip these around. Nice, there we go. And that's still pretty bad, so let's just take a closer look at these. I'm going to flip them around. And if we grab a color ramp, so Shift A, and converter, color ramp, I'm going to feed my video footage into this color ramp, like so. Alright, so if we take a look at this color ramp, and we just drag down these black values a little bit here, you can see this nice mask going on with the leaves here, and the trees. And the white values will be the background, and the darker values will be the foreground. And we can just use this, and drop it into the mix node factor, and if we take a look at this, you can see our monster is kind of back in the fog. And at the moment, this looks pretty terrible, so it actually requires a fair amount of fiddling to get it to work right. If you just have the black values all the way out, that still looks terrible. So what I kind of like to do is take the white values and drop those a little bit, and that will just make him look like he's back in the fog a little bit more. And it took me so long to fiddle with this before, but right now, kind of off the bat, it actually looks fairly good, which kind of surprises me. Let's grab our mix node real quick and just put that into the composite node. Box select these, just drag the mouse across, and then go Shift, right click, drag across these. That will match that together, so they're both doing the same thing. And I think one thing that we could actually do to improve our background here, if you look at the trees back here at this point, they are fairly blurry, and this is fairly defined at the moment. So if we take this render layer and go Shift A, filter, and blur, we can add a tiny bit of blur to that. I wouldn't say it'd be a good idea to go much above 5. If we just take a look here, that's actually pretty nice. So a quick word about the compositor that I may not have made clear is for zooming in and zooming out, there's these really janky hotkeys. Zooming out is Alt-V, and V is to zoom in, and so I just wanted to make you aware of that. Also to pan around like this, Alt and middle mouse button are what you use. And then just middle mouse button will move the nodes around. And scrolling will do that, so just so you're aware about how to navigate around. If we want to add in a few more cool effects, a couple of things we can do real quick is just take this and grab and duplicate the mix node, put this into one value, and then take this blur node, Shift D to duplicate it, move that into the other value, and take this, mix it in with the mix node, maybe turn this up to, I don't know, let's try 14, and then mix that in a tiny bit. If we look at this, we get kind of a nice blur that just helps to make things look, I don't know, I kind of like the way it looks. A little bit goes a long way with this, so just don't overdo it too much towards this way. But if we have it up here, it adds a bit of a nice glow around the edges. And another thing we can do to this is go Shift A, and in Distort, I usually like to add some lens distortion, and just at this bottom value, dispersion I think it's trying to say, if we go about a 0.01, that will add some nice effects to the sides, so it looks more like it's in a lens. And if you crank this up a lot, you can kind of see what it's doing, but definitely don't overdo this. One really handy node that I just came from the future to tell you about is this, and I already mentioned it. I actually cranked that up to a 0.02, but if you hit this jitter button, look at the difference. It looks a lot crazier. It adds some like color noise to it, which I think has some pretty serious Sirenhead vibes. So I realize this tutorial is running a tiny bit long at this point, but if you want to take it over the top, you absolutely can by adding in a converter and separate RGB, then drop in a converter and combine RGB. And if you just match up all these values, it starts looking all crazy. But once you line them all up, it looks like normal again. And this doesn't really accomplish anything here. But if we take something like a distort and a transform node, and just take this and just disalign this a little bit, so the X is a few pixels off, you get this really crazy looking kind of 3D effect, which is a little bit much at the moment. So let's just turn that down a tiny bit, and that gives it a really kind of grungy, lo-fi-ish look. We can also do that with the Y. That will offset some stuff. And you can also do it with these other two values here. And if you just want it to be all messed up, you can absolutely do that. Oh, this is fun. I like just trashing footage. Like I said, a little bit goes a long way with this. That might be a bit much right there. But if we take this and just move it down here, and take our little node set here and move that up, we can use another mix node and just kind of mix that in wherever we want it. So it doesn't have to be like full in-your-face glitchy randomness. It can also be kind of normal. And the cool thing with this is we've got this factor value. So if you had some kind of glitchy footage or something, you could drop that into the factor, and that could be the difference between this insanity and the normalness. Alright, at the end here, let's just make sure these two are coupled up again. And if we go control space, get back out of the full view here, and just go back to our layout, we can look at our rendering properties, and you can look at however you want to render this out. I like to render things out as an image sequence, just so things are a little bit more pliable after the render. But if we render this out, you get something like this. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up this tutorial. If you found it useful and you'd like to see more tutorials like it, there's a link in the description that says free hydraulic kit bash elements. And what happens when you click this is it will actually add you to my email list. And I'll make sure the first thing I email you are some hydraulic kit bash elements made for Blender users like yourself. And these are pretty good for giving you a little bit of a jump start when you're working on mechanical projects. And then the other thing to expect while you're on my email list is updates every week whenever I post a tutorial, just so that you know what's going on. But hey, that's pretty much it. I hope you have an excellent day, and cheers!